Hello, everybody. Darren Cross here, MBA 652, and this is the Chapter 6 presentation for Mod 4. In Chapter 5, we talked about motivation and all the theories of motivation, and so I'm sorry right here. I think that this slide kind of cuts in on my face, but my face is less important than the stuff anyway, so I'm sorry if you're distracted here. I'll try to stay over to the side there. When we think about motivation, one of the things that immediately comes to mind is the concept of money or compensation. And so we intuitively, I think, believe that money translates to motivation. And you see even here, this bullet says that money motivates more than previously thought. The reason why they're making this determination is because we have come to a realization here in the past several years about what really this is. We've understood a construct inside of money a little bit better, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But when we think about money, if it's true that money motivates, and we can definitively make that statement, then what we would say is the more money that someone is offered, the more they're going to be motivated. And that's not necessarily true. So you see some people who might be a fast food worker who's particularly motivated, and then you see someone who's a middle manager making $80,000 a year. They don't have any motivation, and they're not hitting their numbers and that kind of a thing. So people have studied this. Now, money is important, but what we have to understand is that it's a little bit more than that. It's actually a dimension of job satisfaction that is pay satisfaction, right? So it's not just the money in and of itself. Rather, it's our conceptualization of how satisfied we are with the amount of compensation that we have based upon what we do. When you think about all of those other things, the expectancy theory that we've talked about and the equity theory, those things come into play. So the thing that we have, the reason for varying levels of motivation is people think differently about money, right? So some people, to some people it means certain things, and to some people it means certain other things. So some people might be motivated by money. Other people see money as just a hassle and they have to deal with it, and it causes stress. Another thing we have to consider is how people actually perceive money from an ethical standpoint. Is it the root of all evil, or is it something that is a means to an end? And so people treat money differently, and as a result of that, they might actually either be they might derive some other meaning as a result of that. Men and women tend to treat money differently, and we need to take that into consideration. And also, cultures treat money differently. I have a friend from Bangladesh who is Islamic, and he has said that they don't borrow money in his family because it's against his culture to pay interest on things. Not only that, it's against his culture to charge interest. Like, the concept of interest is unethical to him. So I found that interesting. So let's talk about various different kinds of rewards that you might see out in the workplace. The first one is membership and seniority-based rewards. So this is basically, hey, I work here. I've been working here a long time. And as a result of that, I'm deriving some inherent benefit. And that keeps people motivated to do the job and to continue to work places, right? So things like fixed wages and fixed increases on your salary. Those are things that people look forward to, and things that that help with that organizational effectiveness measure that we're looking at. Not the only things. There are some other things that we have to take into consideration, but they're definitely part of. Some advantages to these types of rewards: guaranteed wages may attract certain types of applicants because they know what to expect in that field. And also, if you have seniority-based stuff, it helps with turnover because people know that next year I get my raise, and I'm inclined to stay here. Disadvantages: it doesn't necessarily, just because people are there, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in that organizational effectiveness measure that might be performance or productivity or something like that. The other thing is, if you have a poor performer, it's going to be less encouraging for them to leave. What you hope as a manager is that your culture clashes, and it's easier for people to realize that that culture is not for them and they leave, especially if they're a poor performer. But if you have that golden handcuff, then it's a bad deal for you if it's someone that you would really want to leave, and it's someone that you're eventually going to end up having to fire. But If they know that everything is good here and I'm going to get my increases, then it discourages them from leaving. We also have job status based rewards. So things like the fringe benefits that we have, the perks, and just the things that come along with the job itself. So the good thing about that is that it encourages competition. So whenever you have things that come along with different jobs, it makes people want to earn those things as a result of having those jobs, and so that stimulates competition. And also job evaluation, meaning that we're looking at, it's basically looking at the job itself. So the goal here is to get a job because a job has certain perks. But when you have that, in theory, it's fair, right? So the idea here is the best man wins. And if you rock it out, then you get it. It reminds me of, my son is a wrestler. And, when you are, let's say when you're on a basketball team or a baseball team or even a football team or something like that, where it's a team sport, one of the things that has to happen is the coach has to make a determination as to who the best person is for that the start for that week, right? So in those sports, it's like, I think this kid is good. And then they go out and they do their thing, and they may or may not be as good as you thought they were in practice. Wrestling, it's a different story, right? So when they have a match, what happens is if you are battling for another kid or battling with another kid at a certain weight class, you guys wrestle it out. Whoever wins gets to start that week. So that's kind of what this is. It encourages people to actually be competitive and to go for the job. And if that is really the criteria that we're looking at, then it's easy to see how this is a fair, even field for people, so long as they just, they go through certain pre-designated criteria. The disadvantages, it encourages bureaucratic hierarchy, and that in and of itself may not be a problem, but from a standpoint of being efficient, bureaucracy is not a good thing, right? So it actually reinforces status versus egalitarian culture, which means that it's not even though what we're saying is if you win, you actually get this job, the inherent disadvantage of that is it's about having the job. So it's like, I'm the boss, and it's not about just kind of getting done what we're trying to get done. And so as a result of that, you don't have people who are necessarily bought into the mission. It's all about the status of the job instead. Employees exaggerate duties and hoard resources. So if the deal is that you are you want to be hoisted up into this next job status, then what we do is we kind of glamorize what we have, and then we don't want to share. So that kind of goes against the concept of sharing that vision and being bought into what the company is trying to do as well. Competency-based rewards. When we're talking about competency-based rewards, we're saying it's not really about what job performance you're in. It's also not about being there for a certain amount of time. And we're going to talk about performance-based in a second, but it's also not about how you perform. See, this is a strange kind of nuance to think about. What we're talking about is what competencies you have earned in that position. And so there's two different types here. Broad competency-based rewards, which are based upon competency bands that you achieve at work. And these nuances vary among different jobs. So employees paid more within the band by acquiring and demonstrating certain more competencies, right? So the thing is, you are able to demonstrate that you have the competency to do things. And so I feel like maybe this is kind of how the military is. So once you show that you have supervisory skills or you have done some certain things, that means that you now qualify for different levels inside of that job. So you are a person who's doing something, but you earn some more competencies based on having done them in the past. And then now, because of that qualifies you for, you're still doing the same job, but you go to a different level inside of that job. And so I've seen that. I've seen some of those positions. If you go to usajobs.gov, and if you guys are military, you can kind of check me on this. But some of those things, it'll say starts as a GS11, but or it'll say like for GS11, these are the things that you need. For GS12, must have supervisory experience or a master's degree. For GS13, must have 2 years of this or that or a doctoral degree. And that's what we're really talking about. It doesn't really mean that that person's going to necessarily be good at something, but the idea here is that we're kind of correlating competency to the notion that that's going to translate into some kind of organizational effectiveness measure later. Skill-based pay is really similar as well. Employees are paid more with the number of skill modules learned. So the thing is, this is definitely, well, there are some industries that are like this, but this doesn't translate exactly in the military. But one of the things that happens in the military is that or at least in the Navy, when I was in the Navy, you got qualified to do more and more things. Now, that didn't translate to pay increases in the military, but in some places it does. In some union environments, if you are qualified, or now we're starting to see badges and things like that, and that could translate to some type of rewards later. And so the advantages of that is that it's more, you create a more flexible workforce because you have these people who can kind of back up whenever some other people are out. And so that translates, if you think about total quality management, that translates to that whole concept of making sure that people can deliver on the promise that we've made to customers. The disadvantages are that it's going to be expensive to get people going, and the thing is, people are always kind of training, which I kind of think that's what you want to be doing when you have downtime. But the other thing is, there's the potentiality for subjectivity. So in other words, you say, here's a module that I created. So I create a module, and you're looking at a PowerPoint that's just like this. And then I say, based upon you going through my PowerPoint, I think that you should have this competency. And so you earned another badge. And so that may be true, but then there's also the potentiality that it's also not true. And so I have a higher view. Remember attribution theory. I have a higher view of what my product that is. And so I have a benevolent view of things. And I say, if you go through my training, then you're definitely really, really well trained. And that may not be the case. That's my opinion. And it may not necessarily translate into a workable competency that's actually valuable for the business. So we have to take that into consideration as well. Performance-based rewards, this is what we're mostly used to. This is my favorite kind because you earn the performance and you get the reward. So this is like bonuses, commissions, and piece rate. So, in piece rate systems, you get paid a certain amount for each amount that you create. And then like if you hit once you're over 1,000, then you get a bump for everything over 1,000. It's great. We also have team rewards and organizational rewards that show up in like team bonuses, gain sharing plans or profit sharing plans, and employee stock options, that kind of thing. All of those things are based upon performance. The problem is that, well, what we're talking about here is that helps people to get bought in, but the problem is the deal is you don't, if you refer back to the expectancy theory, the P2O link could have a weak link when you're talking about organizational and even to some extent team rewards, because the idea here is I'm not just talking about what I have to do as an effort in order to get that the performance to get that outcome. I'm concerned about someone else. So I can do what I got to do from the effort, and I can create the performance for me. But what happens if everybody else on my team doesn't perform? And then if you remember back to the attribution theory, the other thing is I'm going to have a benevolent view of my participation on that team, but I'm going to have a malicious view of other people's performance on that team, which is not fair. So it's not that this is necessarily a perfect plan. There are some things to beware of. Now, some of the things that we can do, let me adjust this a little bit. Some of the things that we can do to improve reward effectiveness. Number one, link rewards to performance. That's that makes sense. And this is, if you think about this, this is really kind of expectancy theory stuff, right? So link the rewards to the performance, ensure the rewards are relevant. What does that mean? The valence that we talked about, that reward is something that people actually want. Ensure rewards are valued, same thing there. And watch out for unintended consequences. This is the part that's most important. The thing is, if you don't pay attention to things, it's all about incentive. And if you don't pay attention to things, what you did without realizing it is you created another incentive to do something else. If you guys have ever seen the guys who do what's it called? Freakonomics. They had a documentary on HBO, and they also wrote a book. These are some economists who research a bunch of things, and they found a lot of stuff that's pretty interesting. They come across things in a very interesting way. And what they realized is that one of the guys realized that there must have been some cheating in sumo wrestling. Like, they were looking at win-loss patterns, and it just was not making sense. And their deal is, we think there has to be some cheating going on. And so when they started to interview people, they realized that it actually was the case. Because it turns out that when you are a sumo wrestler, once you reach a certain level of wins, your purse for each match goes up. So let's say that I earn $1,000 a match. Once I have, like, these are arbitrary numbers, but let's say I earn $1,000 a match, and then later on I hit 10 wins. Now I'm at $2,000 a match, and I now have the incentive to get that win sooner, right? So if I can get to that win sooner, it's better for me. So what they were doing is, sumo wrestlers were going to other people and saying, "Hey, I'm about ready to hit my 10th match, or I need to hit my 10th match soon. So why don't you throw a couple matches to me, and I'll give you part of my purse this time." So that's part of the deal, and they realize that. So it goes on. This guy is talking about the concept of incentive, and what he was talking about is the fact that his daughter, he was potty training his daughter, and what he did is he said, "Every time you go to the potty, I will give you a Pop-Tart." And so it was working real great. She would go to she would go on the big girl potty, and then she would get a Pop-Tart. Then he realized she was coming back like 20 minutes later saying, "Daddy, I went potty again." She wants another Pop-Tart. That was an unintended consequence, right? And we have to think these through to see what is happening as a result of what is naturally being incentivized as a result of what we're offering. So we have to make sure that that's the case as well. Another thing that we think about is job design. And what we're talking about is basically designing jobs in and of themselves so that employees in their natural interaction with that job tend to be organized, or not organized, but motivated. So that's really what it's about. So there's a couple of elements that we have to think about when we're doing this. And it takes us back to Frederick Taylor, who's the father of scientific management. And what we're talking about is this concept of job specialization. So one of the things that you do when you're trying to think about a job in and of itself is you think about whether or not it's worth it to actually specialize those jobs. Now, this is kind of the opposite of what we're talking about with competency-based rewards, right? So with competency-based, what we're saying is we're going to kind of get you trained up in case you need to do stuff. With job specialization, we're saying, hey, instead of putting this pen together, right, I'm going to have one person, put the ink tube inside, then I'm going to pass it, and the next person puts this lid on, and then I'm going to pass it. And, it doesn't make sense for everything, but perhaps it makes sense for some things. So let's talk about, sorry about that. Let's talk about how we're really trying to match these jobs, right? So what happens is when we look at all of these elements of a job itself, skill variety, task identity, autonomy, getting feedback, and you mix it with what's going on inside of people, then you start to get different organizational effectiveness outcomes. And that's really what we're after. When we're talking about job design, we're talking about putting elements into a job in order to create these psychological states in our employees so that they have organizational effectiveness outcomes. And that immediately and directly, this is going to translate to one of those behaviors that we're talking about, and then hopefully that translates to an organizational effectiveness outcome like profit or increased market share or turnover is better and that kind of thing. But we don't need to go into each one of these elements. Just know that the idea here is that we're matching the job characteristics with psychological states inside of our employees. And the idea here is that we want them to have some kind of organizational effectiveness outcome that we're looking at, right? So motivation or job satisfaction or pay satisfaction or something like that. These are just elements of the jobs that we're really not going to talk about. Well, we'll talk general about this. So other ways of designing that job rotation means that you rotate people into different positions so that you just minimize the strain. Repetitive stress or repetitive strain injuries could happen. And so sometimes we move people around just to kind of give them a pattern interrupt. They're learning more about the business, and also they stay motivated because their boredom goes down. Another thing is job enlargement, which means that you add tasks to an existing job. So you have to do this carefully. Sometimes you have to do it as a result of profitability and things like that. But what we have to do is think about how people are interacting. See, it's about those critical states and not just the financial measure at the end. So you got to think about how people are interacting with this job. And so some people want more responsibility. And so you didn't have to pay them more in order to get them motivated. You gave them some more responsibility. You gave them other things to do inside of their job. And as a result of that, it sharpens their saw, it kind of resets things with them, and it helps them to actually want to do what they're trying to do. Then there's another element that's a little bit different, but similar. Job enrichment. So you do some things like maybe you group some other jobs with that job that makes sense. And it's kind of still giving them other tasks to do, but it really is about some of those other elements like status, perhaps even pay or competency and that kind of thing. But again, when we're doing this, what you have to understand is that it's not just about saying, you now do this. You have to think about how people are actually interacting with that job itself. Another element that's very, very strong in almost every organizational outcome or organizational effectiveness outcome is the concept of empowerment. Empowerment is really basically people feeling like they have a say-so in their job, right? And so this is really kind of just different dimensions of empowerment, right? And these are kind of saying the same thing. So when we're talking about empowerment, there's an element of self-determination because people feel like they have freedom and discretion to do what they need to do inside of the job. Not necessarily that they have the freedom to do what they want, but they have the freedom to activate their own discretion in the achievement of that goal itself. So it's not like I get to go to work whenever I want. It's that I have a critical role in producing this thing that is important to this organization. So that goes into employees believe that their work is important. And as a result of that, they gain competence because they feel like they can do some things. They're seeing how their work actually translates to the organizational goal. And that's actually a good thing. How do we support empowerment? Well, the individual factors, this is kind of a job matching kind of a thing, right? So we have to make sure that the people that we hire for certain things have the potentiality or they already possess the skills and characteristics that they need to be successful in that job. Now, what this means is we have to be thoughtful about who we put where. And this is a tough thing to figure out because whenever we make a hiring decision, it's always about taking that risk, right? So it's like, I think you could do it. And that's really what we have to be thinking about now. It's not about you're my buddy and I would love to hang out with you. It's not about you have a degree necessarily and that just means that you're going to be successful. You have to just kind of really feel like this person is going to they have everything that they need to be successful in this job. Even if you feel like you need to train them, that's fine, but you have to understand that. Another thing to think about are the job design factors. So what is going into that job? What kind of autonomy is naturally there? What is the significance of each task? How are they going to interact in that job with other people? It's not just about the person, it's about matching them to the job as well. And then things that you're going to be able to do as an organization is important too. What kind of resources are we going to provide? Are we a learning organization or not? Is this a deal where we inherently trust our employees, or is this a deal where we inherently micromanage? And so based upon all of these things, we come up with this mesh of something that shows up as empowerment. There's the chance that it's just not possible for that kind of a job, and that's fine. You have to make sure that the job is right for the type of person and the type of resources that you have as an organization to create empowerment. In some environments, you don't even want empowerment. You just want someone to show up and do what you're supposed to do. But that's why this stuff is hard. Managers have to think about this, and so that's what we have to take into consideration. Self-leadership. This is important. We often see that we want to have people who are self-starters or self-leaders, and this is a great thing. Self-leadership is a process of influencing yourself to establish the self-direction, self-motivation you need to actually perform the task. And this is tough because, when I coach people, one of the things that I think about is the inherent incentive that you're providing for people, right? So I was talking to one person who this was a health operation, and they have a front desk person, and the front desk person was receiving some pain as a result of some of the things that just naturally happened in her position. So the deal is this was a doctor who was performing a procedure that was not accepted by insurance, and so inherently what happens is at some point there has to, the employee has to have a conversation about the payment, and it wasn't that this was like thousands of dollars, but it was several $100s, and so people, if what was happening is it wasn't being communicated to the patients that this typically wasn't covered by insurance. And so, the doctor would do this procedure and then come out to the front desk and they would say, okay, that's $175. And the people would be stunned, right? So one of the things that was happening on the phone is that this person who was at the front desk, when someone would call and say, hey, I want some more information about this procedure, she would say, well, first of all, insurance doesn't cover it, and it's $175. So just letting you know right off the bat, because her deal is she didn't want to be uncomfortable. And so I was talking to the doctor about this, and I said, hey, you need to have a script for that, because what's happening is this person is taking leadership, but unfortunately she's preventing certain people from coming into the office who may benefit from this and may decide after having talked to you that this is actually a procedure that they want to do and that it's worth $175. But if you stop someone with the wall right off the bat, then there's a group of people who will never come in because their deal is $175, and they don't really realize all the inherent benefits of this procedure in and of itself. And so I suggested that he have first of all, that he build the financial conversation into what he was talking about, right? Because price in and of itself isn't the only determinant. You have to look at cost benefit, and perhaps there's some other things that go along with that. And especially when you're talking things like weight loss, and you say, well, this procedure is $175, but what's going to happen is that you're going to save in this other area of your life or something like that. So we just have to think about that. When people are self-leaders, that in and of itself is good, but they still need to be self-leaders, with respect to the organizational goal itself. So when we're talking about self-leadership, what we're talking about is all kinds of theories of motivation that kind of go into those drives that we're talking about. So some elements of self-leadership: personal goal setting. Leaders set goals. That's just all there is to it. And there's a lot of research about goal setting and how goal setting impacts actually goal achievement, which one blaring obvious notion is that if you set a goal, that means that you have one, and so it's easier to achieve it. And if you don't set a goal, you're doing things all day long, but you don't realize that you're achieving some stuff. And so when you start to kind of measure that and understand what's going on, then you kind of say, hey, I am achieving some stuff, because now I said that I was going to do it, and I actually did it. That kind of feeds into self-confidence and self-efficacy and that kind of thing. Another thing that self-leaders do is that they go into mental imagery and self-talk. This has been around for several decades, and for a while people were saying this is guru stuff, but a lot of science is coming out on this, or a lot of research is coming out supporting the notion that, reaffirming positive self-image and reaffirming the positive element of this is very useful, and it kind of feeds back into goal setting. So little simple things like, if you say, I was a weight loss coach, so when I'm talking to people about this kind of thing, I quite often talk about what it takes, because that's often the hardest battle that people have. So when you say, I'm so fat, it's different than saying, like you say, I want to lose this weight. It's different than saying, I want to become this weight, right? So if you want to lose 50 pounds, if you want to go from 250 to 200 pounds, it's often a better positive message to say, I am so happy and grateful that I am working towards my goal of reaching 200 pounds. Instead of saying, I want to lose 50 pounds, right? I just don't want to be 250. See, what's happening is you're creating neural pathways inside of your brain, and as a result of that, we go back to that other, the other pattern of how we create things. We're creating pathways in our brain, we're creating belief systems, we're creating actions, and as a result of that, we have some results. And so a lot of time when people are successful, people are actually visualizing, creating mental imagery. When you see Tiger Woods and he's doing this and you think, man, he's just trying to get the sun out of his eyes. No, what he's doing is visualizing what's happening. When you're visualizing things, you're actually triggering neural pathways and impulses inside of your body and the muscles and all of that stuff to where you're actually doing it. And then later on, when you do it, when you do something the second time, it becomes easier. I remember when I was a freshman in high school, I was in high school in the 80s, so this was the Michael Jordan days, and everybody wanted to dunk a basketball. And so I remember I was trying to dunk a basketball, and I just could not do it. I could not dunk a basketball. I was so close. I could grab the rim. I don't understand. Then all of a sudden, I wobble one in, and then the next time, I just kind of was more successful. And from that point forward, I could dunk a basketball. Not like Michael Jordan or any other person who could dunk a basketball. It was like I was the bare minimum of basketball dunkers. But the thing that I thought was interesting is 5 minutes ago, I could not do this. And now I can. I just can. It's because of this self-efficacy. It's this thing of I know that I can do it now. It's the 4-minute mile syndrome, right? Until someone ran a 4-minute mile, no one thought it was possible. And then after that, tons of people started running 4-minute miles. So that kind of comes into play here. Self leaders actually design their own natural rewards so that they can become motivated. And that's part of it. So you have to say, if you're trying to do something, you say, okay, I'm going to achieve this thing, and then I'm going to have coffee at noon. Or I'm going to achieve this thing, and then I'm going to go for a walk. Natural little things that you'd use to reward yourself. And this is something that people who are self-leaders have the habit of doing. Self-monitoring, tracking your success. That's something that's very, very important. Not to the extent that it's inefficient now, but to the extent that you can, and this is in all of business, to the extent that you can, we should be measuring some things. And so this is just part of it. You set systems in that help you figure out how well you're doing and that kind of thing. And self-reinforcement. This is kind of like designing natural rewards, but you reinforce things using that stuff that we talked about in motivation, right? So positive reinforcement and even negative reinforcement in order to provide a natural and neural pathway incentive for that kind of behavior. Predictors of self-leadership. How do we know that someone's actually going to be a self-leader? First of all, when people have conscientiousness and they're more extroverted, they tend to be better leaders or better self-leaders. In other words, they can work on, they can work with themselves. If they have self-esteem, self-efficacy, and they feel like they have control over things, then they're more likely to be self-leaders. That's the thing that's inside of them. But also in environments where there's a lot of job autonomy, in organizations where people are allowed to participate and leaders of that organization are not micromanagers, then self-leaders actually will activate and stand up and rise to the occasion and do what they're supposed to be. Self-leaders also thrive in environments that are measurement-oriented culture. So if there's a scorecard, self-leaders are great with that kind of a thing because they naturally need that in order to be successful anyway. So those are some of the elements that we use inside of organizations in order to help keep people motivated. This isn't all-inclusive. This is kind of an overview of things, but there are all kinds of things that people use. We did I'm going to say a superficial conversation of motivation and a superficial conversation of performance practices. If you decide to go on to a doctoral degree or something like that, there are just volumes and volumes of research about all of this kind of stuff. But I think that this kind of lays the groundwork and provides you a foundation to kind of understand how this stuff fits inside of that Mars model. So take this stuff into consideration as you do what you're supposed to do for this week. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Good job, everybody.